My name is Jack Rooke, and I am the writer, creator, and narrator of Big Boys. Big Boys is about two boys who are sort of at different ends of the so-called spectrum of masculinity. Jack is a kind of dweeby, shy, closeted guy. He's a bit of a mummy's boy. He's just lost his dad, and he's sort of quite terrified at the prospect of having to move on and start a new chapter. And then he moves into uni and meets Danny, who is your slightly like mature student, 25 years old, a bit of a lad's lad, is trying to sort of live like perhaps a bit of a lost adolescence and going back to uni. And both of them, I think, are actually, quite lonely, really. And they come together and they find sort of friendship and companionship, and they both sort of want to figure themselves out individually, but they're kind of choosing to do it side by side, which I think is a really lovely and quite sort of truthful depiction of what most friendships are like, And for me, it was really nice to write a sort of gay central character with a straight best mate, and to write sort of flip the gay best friend trope and it be the other way around, because I think that's just as reflective of real life. It's just that telly hasn't, shown it that much. And and they're kind of, they're going through things like grief and trying to figure out their mental health and their sort of well-being and their sexuality and who they want to sleep with and who they don't want to sleep with and all the pressure of it all and stuff like that. And they're just sort of going through things that I actually think quite normal topics for you to go through at that age, sort of coming of age, exploring identity type stuff. Big Boys kind of came from a Edinburgh Fringe show, a set of shows that I did in 2015, 2017 called Good Grief and Happy Hour. And it was a sort of like adaptation, I suppose, of doing kind of funny comedy theatre show about uni and being a fresher. And I directed the whole sort of show to the audience, in the sense that like the audience were you, if that makes sense. So the audience were almost a bit like the character of Danny. And then I think, it started off with the commissioner at a different channel, and they commissioned a pilot. We made a pilot in 2018 for somewhere else. And then thankfully it just sort of landed at Channel 4 as a sort of fully kind of formed world. In terms of the casting, they're pretty much majority people that me and Jim, the director, sort of have picked. So John Pointing, I've known him for years, and he's been on board Big Boys from day one. I really actually don't think I'd have written the show had I not found someone to play that character immediately. And then Camille Cajuri, who plays Peggy, she's always only ever been the only person we ever met for that role, and she's perfect, and I wrote it for her. Same with Alyssa Adele, who plays Yemi. Same with Katie Wicks, who plays Jules. So they've all, like, a lot of them have had their parts completely written for them. And then Dylan, we found when we were trying to find someone to sort of play me, and that's such a weird casting experience to go through. But then the character's quite different to me. Like, there are similarities, but actually, in terms of like myself as a character, I'm much more like Jack, Danny, Corinne, and Yemi. I'm a bit like all four of them combined. There's bits of me in all of them. And then once we'd found Dylan, who's such a great comic actor, but also like really kind of gives us this sort of vulnerability and this sort of, want for, I suppose, the character to progress, and you're really rooting for Dylan's Jack type thing. So he was great. And then we got a casting director, Rachel Sheridan, to sort of come on quite late in the game to find some of the other parts, and crucially to find Corinne, who she did in Azuka Hoyle, who's just absolutely fantastic. So it kind of, the casting process was quite accumulative. It sort of started with John, and then Camille, and then Alyssa, and then Katie, and it sort of went on like that. All of the characters are pretty much based on like 3 or 4 people I know in real life molded into one. Maybe apart from my mum. I think Peggy is pretty much my mum. Even my mum sort of, every time she watches the show, she sort of like hits me on the shoulder to be like, "Oh, you put that in there, how dare you?" There was one thing that described my mum as, there was a review that described Peggy as foul-mouthed, and my mum basically was like, "Why have you told everyone I swear?"
Who the is that?
But my mum was like, "God, Camille Cajuri is hot, isn't she?" And I was like, "Yeah." She was like, "Thanks for that." I was like, "Don't you worry, mum." Jules is kind of based on somebody who was there at my uni, and a girl in my year who has become Jules and is still there working there. And I loved that character so much, and all of the sort of kindness and cringe that Jules has, I think is brilliant. So it's sort of, they're all kind of different people I know rolled into one, and then with the name slightly changed so that no one can shout at me on the street. I think Channel 4 were the right home for big boys because they've kind of got their receipts, if that makes sense. Like, I think Channel 4, out of all the British broadcasters, have really proved their salt as a broadcaster that makes stuff that the others wouldn't, that makes LGBTQ plus work and stories, and has done now for like 25, 30 years, and makes us particularly great stuff about mental health and mental illness and the parameters of that on screen. And so I don't know, I feel like all the stuff and the real identity of Big Boys, it felt like matched with the principles of what Channel 4 does. And when we were making the pilot for a previous broadcaster, we really were making the pilot thinking, God, this is a Channel 4 show. Like, even a lot of the crew would say that, like, just the tone. And I think the sort of irreverence and the fun part of it, mixing fun with these sort of heavier issues, I think is something that Channel 4 have done really well. And yet keeping all the jokes in there, you know, it never gets too schmaltzy or too sort of, you know, self-indulgent. I hope. I am the writer saying that, so I do hope. It could be the most self-indulgent thing ever. No one's telling me. I really love doing the narration because it's sort of, I think it gives the show another sort of layer of, you know, that you're watching a set of past memories.
Our neighbours showed that they cared by discreetly dumping lasagnas on the doorstep like unwanted babies. Tracy Brooks from Number 18 was my favourite, but Mum reckons she bought it from Costco.
And therefore that sort of narrative device of, you know, referring to Danny as you, it's like, well, where's that leading and what does that mean? And I quite like keeping people held in suspense or in not sort of knowing and not making it a bit ambiguous. And, you know, it's also fun for me to narrate it because it's sort of, a lot of the jokes in the show are jokes that I wrote like 10 years ago. You know, there's stuff that I feel like has sort of grown with me as I've tried to become a better writer and tried to become a better sort of comedian. Some of the most embarrassing stuff in the show is the stuff that's true. And I think that's why it sort of works, because it obviously can only be written from a place of, you know, having lived through it.
Would you like to come dine on me?
I've already eaten.
Oh, you greedy boy. Should I get out my Willy Winkle now?
Oh, I'm not sure that's necessary.
Oh, come on, I'll get me trousers on.
Some of the really embarrassing stuff, like going through the dark rooms in Gordy's gay club with Yemi, like, and sort of being like, God, it smells like poo, and I think I've just felt something wet hit my back and all that sort of stuff, like all based on truth and all stuff that I'm still going through therapy to get over. I just really wanted it to feel like a show that was for everyone, and that, you know, straight blokes who, you know, might not watch shows like Big Boys would also still enjoy and find something to love. And I think I've tried to fill it with as much inclusivity and as much like real queer specificity, but also like British working class references, and like, you know, the fact that they go to Harvester at the end, and the fact that they like love Gamu and X Factor and have a fish called Alison Hammond. Like, I just really wanted it to feel very rooted in being British, but in a way that never felt exclusionary, in a way that was like anyone and everyone could try to find something to love in this show, or try to find a character that they relate to. And yeah, and I think, you know, the positive response that we've had in the last like 2-3 weeks since it's came out has been so like amazing. I mean, it's been overwhelming and really fun. Like, it's just been really fun to be like, yeah, we made it, and people really respond to a lot of those, you know, specific niche references that aren't that niche, because we live in a country full of 60 million people who are all watching This Morning and are all watching Gogglebox and are all watching like the same stuff and have the same like cultural staples. And it was so nice to write it for Channel 4 and write it for a public service broadcaster that wasn't worried about me trying to make it like very global you know, appeal to an international market was just like, this will appeal to who it appeals to because it has honesty and authenticity and heart in it. And I think that's what Derry Girls did so well. Like, and Derry Girls is still a huge hit in America and all over the world. So like, you know, I just wanted it to really, I wanted to leave people with the sense that they'd felt like they'd watched something that was true to them and not just like a really silly sitcom or a really depressing drama, like something that, you know, had elements of both, but then was just always joyful.